Thank you for downloading from the BBC. For details of our complete range of podcasts and our terms of use, go to bbcworldservice.com/podcasts.
A few weeks ago, someone let me have access to a confidential database for half an hour. I wanted to see if it said anything about some friends of mine, and I got a bit of a shock.
The first word which comes up is terrorism. And I'm clicking on to the screen to see why. Yeah. Well, in red, which seems to indicate terrorism, is links to 21/7 London tube bombings, various well-known terrorists, Richard Reed, the shoe bomber. Now scrolling, I know it's quite sort of hair-raising stuff, weapons training.
I am Peter Oborne, and this BBC World Service programme is my attempt to discover why the bank accounts of several British Muslim charities and individuals were suddenly closed down by HSBC last summer. It has taken me on a rather dramatic journey. For a start, it led me to resign my job as chief political commentator of London's Daily Telegraph. The newspaper had failed to publish an article I'd written, critical of HSBC's refusal to explain why it had closed these Muslim accounts without even offering any right of appeal. As well as being one of the world's largest banks, HSBC is, by the way, one of the Telegraph's most important advertisers. So footloose and freelance, I set out to discover for this programme the reason for HSBC's actions.
It is not a decision taken by HSBC. It is actually...
It is a decision taken by HSBC. They decide to close the bank account.
It is not a decision made by HSBC. Trust me on this.
So were the Muslims targeted by mistake? Were they targeted because they really are secret terrorists? Or were they targeted simply because they are Muslims? My journey began at Finsbury Park Mosque, near the Emirates Football Stadium in North London. It was once home to Abu Hamza, an imam who is now serving a life sentence in the United States for his involvement in hostage-taking and planning to set up a militant training camp. But for the past decade, the mosque has been under the control of a group backed by the London police.
My name is Mohammed Kosbar. I'm the chairman of Finsbury Park Mosque.
Mohammed, tell me what happened with your bank account.
Yeah, it started just in 2014, basically, when we received the letter. Before that time, we haven't got any issue. As far as we know, as a management, as a mosque, we haven't got any problems with HSBC at that time.
Actually, I can see you've got that letter in front of you. So here it arrives, dated 22nd of July. Dear the Treasurer, I hadn't taken trouble to find out your name. Important notice, closure of accounts. HSBC Bank has recently conducted a general review and has concluded that provision of banking services to Finsbury Park Mosque now falls outside of our risk appetite. We are therefore giving you 2 months' notice of our decision to close your accounts. Unless you tell us in writing that you want us to close your accounts earlier, we will close them on the 22nd of September 2014. And then it goes on, a bit of detail. It says, we appreciate this may cause you some inconvenience, and we will do our best to assist you with this change. It gives you somebody to ring up and ask questions to. And then it finally says, I'm sorry we are unable to continue to provide you with banking services, but do thank you for your custom to date. Well, that's not much of a letter, is it? It hasn't given you any reason.
Not at all. And this is why we wrote back to the HSBC and we asked them why you are closing our account. We need to know, actually. And they replied back that we don't have to give you a reason for it, and we keep it to ourselves. And this damage our reputation, damage our credibility, which we've been working very hard during the last 10 years to maintain, actually, since we took over the mosque from Abu Hamza supporters. So this was a really damaging step to our community and to our organization.
How do we solve the mystery created by HSBC's refusal to explain itself? I'm a conservative journalist. and unfashionably for someone on the political right, I have long worried that British Muslims are being singled out for unfair treatment. I'm usually sceptical when other journalists and politicians accuse politically active Muslims of being extremist and helping terrorism. But in this case, I had to ask myself an uncomfortable question. Had I been naive? Surely HSBC wouldn't have shut down the accounts without good reason. But governments have the power to freeze the assets of terrorists. This legislation has not been deployed in this instance. So what happened? The brutal truth is that all banks are terrified of being accused of financing terror after a wave of punitive fines and court judgments emanating from the US. As a result, they are now sifting through their clients to decide which ones pose a threat to their business, a process known as de-risking. I went to talk to Ayman Dean, a jihadist who fought in Bosnia in the 1990s. He worked for British intelligence before joining HSBC. You might have heard him telling his life story on the BBC World Service's Hard Talk recently. Now an independent banking consultant, his insights are breathtaking.
Let's take an example here. Let's say that you, Peter, you go to the bank. You apply for a bank account. You put your name, Peter Obon. What happens is the application will be then sent to several departments, including the compliance department within any bank. What will the compliance officer in the bank do is put your name in the World Check.
World Check? What on earth is World Check?
The World Check is a software run by Thomson Reuters, updated all the time. And if they put Peter Obon and no results, basically it's just a journalist with no other priors, you were not involved in terrorism. However, if you were involved in terrorism, money laundering, fraud, it will appear accordingly in red color. So once the red color appear, it means basically that the compliance cannot do anything about it. They will just return back the application with rejected.
I've never heard of World Check before. It sounds a sensible system. And if Ayman Dean is right, then it clearly plays a major role in enabling banks to make judgments about their clients. I wanted to find out more, so I approached the media giant Thomson Reuters, which owns World Check, and asked for access to the software. They said,
"Nope, you're from the media. We don't allow media access."
That answer has the great merit of being clear. Unfortunately for World Check, I'm not the only one who is curious about how it works. As I set out to learn more, I came across one of their clients, which has deep reservations about its methods. They felt so strongly that they agreed to flout World Check's terms and conditions and grant us access.
I'm now inputting Finsbury Park Mosque. The first word which comes up is terrorism. I'm now clicking on to the screen to see why. Yeah. Well, in red, which seems to indicate terrorism, is links to 21/7 London tube bombings, various well-known terrorists, Richard Reed, the shoe bomber. And so it becomes a bit more explicable why HSBC might have closed down the Finsbury Mosque bank account. You know, I read that alleged terror-linked Sunni mosque in North London. Whew. Membership reportedly included terrorists and radical Islamists, allegedly recruited terrorists and facilitated terrorist activity. So that's the first thing which you read. I know it's quite sort of hair-raising stuff, weapons training. Having read all this stuff, we now read February 2005, reorganised and reopened by Mainstream Muslim Association of Britain with a new board of trustees and a new imam. Well, that's a relief, but it takes quite a lot of time, and you've got to read this website quite carefully to learn this crucial piece of information that the Finsbury Park Mosque is not any longer said to be connected with terrorism.
Finsbury Park Mosque was not the only organisation which lost its bank account in July of 2014. Anas Al-Takriti is president of the Cordoba Foundation, a London-based think tank which says that it tries to build dialogue between the Muslim world and the West.
We all go by our credit records and credit scores. And today my credit score will show that my bank account was closed. My children's bank accounts were closed at the age of 13 and 17 before they've even dared dip their fingers into the financial wheelings and dealings of modern life. And all of a sudden, I'm left to consider whether I'm a money launderer, whether I'm a drug dealer, or whether I'm a terrorist. Because those are the reasons why banks usually close down accounts.
Can WorldCheck offer any clues as to why the bank accounts of Mr. Al-Takriti and his family were closed?
I'm now entering the Cordoba Foundation in the WorldCheck website. It's loading now. It's come up. And in red, the first word I see is terrorism. I see two things, Cordoba Foundation, and above it, terrorism in dark red. I'm now going to look behind that. All right, now the details are coming up. It's reportedly listed as a terrorist organization by the Cabinet of UAE, the United Arab Emirates. So this designation by the UAE has caused Cordoba to be linked to terrorism on this website. It then has a disclaimer of sorts. It says no further information has been found, and if this profile contains negative allegations, it should be assumed that such allegations are denied. The accuracy of the information found in the underlying media sources should be verified with the profile subject before any action is taken. In accordance with our terms and conditions, unless you are under a legal or regulatory obligation to do so, this profile and WorldCheck's identity should not be disclosed. In other words, WorldCheck does not want clients to reveal that they're being used in any way. One of the things I'm going to do is ask Mr. Al-Takriti and the Finsbury Park Mosque if they're aware of the existence of WorldCheck, which may be, it's quite likely to be, one of the reasons why they're having difficulty getting a bank account.
Let's sum up what we've learnt so far. First, the banks risk massive fines if they allow payments to prescribed groups. As a result, they depend on websites such as WorldCheck to help them make decisions about who to retain or take on as customers. We've also learnt that Cordoba Foundation and the Finsbury Park Mosque are listed under the terrorism category on this WorldCheck website, even though, as far as we can tell, these two organisations are treated as entirely legal in Britain. And finally, we know that HSBC closed the bank accounts of both in July 2014. I wanted to find out more about WorldCheck, who their sources were, how they assembled them, and whether they were simply repeating just hearsay information. They agreed to a conference call with a group of their senior employees.
The sources that we use have to be highly reliable sources, so we don't make use of opinion sites, blog sites, phony newspapers, and those alike. Then also we will not include people on our database purely on journalistic allegations. We require that this reputable media source indicates that a law enforcement body, like the police or some other regulator, is busy with an investigation that's been declared. Someone has appeared in court, someone is under prosecution. So there is very strict guidelines that make sure that the information is not hearsay and guesswork because of all these requirements that we operate under.
But that is not what we discovered when we tested out their system. We found that their sources included blogs, for example, Muslim Brotherhood Watch, Wikipedia, and the not exactly impartial UAE news agency, WAM. When we put this to them, they told me,
WorldCheck uses only reliable and reputable public domain sources, such as official sanctions lists, law and regulatory enforcement lists, government sources, and trustworthy media publications for risk-based information or allegations about an individual or entity. We also provide secondary identifying information on individuals, such as dates and place of birth, and this will be similarly verified with reputable and official sources. If blog content appears, It is only as a supporting source for that secondary information and is clearly identified as such.
I had one last question to put to WorldCheck.
Do you accept that there will be people who have been denied bank accounts and their lives made pretty intolerable, therefore, because of the existence of claims made against them which appear on the WorldCheck database?
It's difficult for me to answer that question not having first-hand knowledge, but if that's the case, it is based on decisions made by the financial institution themselves in terms of their internal risk appetite and procedures. We just one of the information providers to them. The profiles quite clearly state where the information comes from. It clearly states that they cannot rely on this information exclusively.
That was a very revealing conversation. The ultimate decision on whether to open or close down a bank account is with the banks. So we rang HSBC. They denied our request for an interview. They gave us a statement instead, and here it is.
When we review a customer relationship, we typically gather information from a wide range of sources and take a number of factors into consideration. Although we can't always provide customers with specific reasons for closing an account, any such decisions are not taken lightly and are not based on a customer's race or religion. We are committed to working with the UK government and industry bodies to support the not-for-profit sector and to help charity customers manage risk in their operations.
What was puzzling me at this stage was the ability of the UAE to brand the Cordoba Foundation as a terrorist group. The UAE is a tiny Gulf state. It has itself been the centre of money laundering allegations. It's been criticised for human rights abuses, including torture. It has branded some of its political opponents and critics as terrorists. The Muslim Brotherhood is a political opponent of the ruling families. This could explain why Cordoba, whose president Anas Al-Takriti has links to the Brotherhood, is designated by the UAE as a terror group. Since HSBC refused to talk to me, I brought into the studio Eamon Dean, the expert who told me of the existence of WorldCheck in the first place. He also happens to be a UAE resident. I asked him whether it was fair that organisations like Cordoba have been listed by WorldCheck under terrorism.
This is where the trouble for the banks arise, because at the end of the day, the banks are not in the business of defining terrorism. The banks are in the business of making money, while avoiding risk at the same time. And one of the greatest risks that the bank always trying to, or any bank would try to avoid, is the reputation risk of being associated with a terrorist entity, organization, or an individual. So for the UAE, as a respected financial hub, it would be difficult for any global bank to ignore their list, regardless of what are the motives behind the United Arab Emirates proscribing that organization or this entity or this individual. So that is why when the UAE came up with that list, HSBC Bank, as well as any other global bank, must listen and must take action. All the major global banks got their headquarters based in Dubai in the UAE. That is Barclays, Standard Chartered, HSBC, Deutsche Bank, Citibank. So these banks cannot ignore the list produced by the country hosting their regional headquarters in the Middle East. Therefore, if an organization finds their name on that list, then they will understand that they will have their accounts closed and the relationship with their banks terminated if these banks have any footprint in the Middle East.
Most fair-minded people listening to what you're saying will be shocked that somebody, a British citizen who is defined as a terrorist by a foreign country, which has a very suspect definition of terrorism, can therefore just have his bank account stripped by a British bank. They will see that as quite frightening and totalitarian.
Well, let me answer by saying that I do not speak on behalf of HSBC or any other bank. I'm just speaking as an expert on terrorism finance and the banking industry's reaction to such phenomena. But it is not a decision taken by HSBC. It is actually at the end.
It is a decision taken by HSBC. They decide to close the bank account.
It is not a decision made by HSBC. Trust me on this. At the end of the day, they will do what the World Check will tell them. So it wasn't a decision by HSBC to close or not to close. They will have to. They have to in order to avoid penalties imposed on them by the regulators, whether in the UK and also in the US. The HSBC, as well as any other bank, like Barclays and Deutsche and UBS, they are actually looking over their shoulders as far as the regulators are concerned. And they are not targeting Muslim organizations just, out of the blue. They will just act upon, databases like the World Check telling them about their own customers. And based on that, they will de-risk.
Eamon Dean is right to point out that Muslims are by no means the only people who are having their bank accounts closed. But Muslim charities have a particular problem. A reliable source in the British government, as well as those with inside knowledge of the banking industry, told us that the government's anxiety about the Muslim Brotherhood, as well as panic over the emergence of ISIS in the Middle East, did cause many banks to conduct reviews of their clients in the early summer of 2014. Individuals associated with both the Cordoba Foundation and Finsbury Park Mosque in London have links to the Brotherhood, which is designated a terrorist organisation by some Middle Eastern states, including the UAE and Saudi Arabia, though no Western country has followed suit. I went to Finsbury Park Mosque to break to Mohammed Kosba that his mosque is listed by the World Check database under the category terrorism.
It's frustrating, shocking. We never get hold to this information before, and we never thought that still Finsbury Park Mosque considered as a tourist place or tourist. I don't know how they describe it. Is it tourist organizations or whatever? So the 2,000 people from our community and from the wider community who come attend, the police who are here today, the council and our local MP who come give regular surgeries here in the mosque, are they terrorists? It is frustrating to hear such news, and it's shocking.
I raised with Mr. Kosba what I found the most troubling element in the World Check profile. Mohammed Sawala, who is said to be one of the most senior Muslim Brotherhood figures in Britain, as well as allegedly a Hamas commander in Gaza 25 years ago, is a trustee of the mosque.
It's not for me to bring him trustees or not. He's been with us from the beginning when we took over, when we had these meetings with the government at that time, with the police and with the Charity Commission, with our local MP.
I don't know whether or not this was the reason why your bank account was closed, but certainly the designation was up on the World Check list, as far as I can see, when it was closed.
I also showed Anas Al-Takriti the World Check's profile of the Cordoba Foundation, which is also listed under terrorism. I put it to him straight.
Is there any foundation at all that Cordoba has ever had any connection with terrorism?
Not as far as I know. In fact, I
Well, the
would go
presence
as
of
far
it,
as I'd go as far as to say no. But the problem in terms of the labelling of the Cordoba Foundation as associated with terrorism seems to rely heavily, from what you read to me, upon the designation of the United Arab Emirates government. I make absolutely no secret and have absolutely no regrets about criticising the UAE, the regime and the government for being anti-democratic, for committing vile, serious human rights abuses on virtually every single level. And when maybe failing to curtail my activities or my statements, my public stands against the UAE, it just basically passed its own legislation, determining that the Cordoba Foundation, and maybe myself as being the CEO of the Cordoba Foundation, a terrorist organization. Now, that's problematic, especially when we're talking about a label slapped on a British entity working within the United Kingdom laws, when such an organization can actually be called or associated with terrorism, such a vile and serious accusation, by a corrupt, authoritarian, non-democratic, human rights abusing regime. And that taken seriously. That's a huge, huge problem.
We've come as far as we can towards solving the mystery of why HSBC closed down those Muslim bank accounts. Eamon Dean, an expert on finance, told me that in the post-9/11 world, banks are quite right to examine more closely who their customers are. But do we really want the big global banks to strip customers of their accounts on hearsay information with no explanation given? Are we happy to risk categorizing organizations as terrorist on the say-so of a single government with its own murky political objectives? There is a deeper and more troubling context here. By sending the message to law-abiding Muslims that they're excluded from the simple privileges enjoyed by most of their fellow citizens, we risk encouraging rather than suppressing extremism. After he expressed his shock, Anas Al-Takriti ventured a request.
Peter, since you've been in touch with these people, just a question. Is it possible for someone like myself to address this, to ask them to remove it, to maybe meet with me and ask me questions? Maybe I can fill in a form to get my name or the name of the Cordoba Foundation removed?
Yeah, I had a conversation with the people who run WorldCheck. They said that anybody can query any designation that they're given, and they can even use the Data Protection Act to ask for the details of how they're portrayed and then challenge those details, I think they said.
But had it not been for you coming to me and giving me this information, I would have never known.
And plenty of others are in exactly the same boat. I'm Peter Oborne, and helping me solve the mystery of the bank account closures was my producer, Anna Meisel.
There are dozens of different podcasts now available from the BBC, including news, documentaries, science, business, arts and sport. For details of them all, go to bbcworldservice.com/podcasts.